Hello, everybody. Today we've got a rare alternate history. We're going to go back to the last election, 2020. We're going to swap out Donald Trump for Mike Pence. And we're also going to swap out Joe Biden for Kamala Harris. I have gotten a bunch of suggestions for these, but I very rarely do them due to the significant amount of speculation. I think the easiest ones to do are the more recent ones. So let's try to dive into this. And as always, there's endless different things you could focus on to come up with a different outcome. In this, I'm assuming Donald Trump just did not run for re-election, and it's Mike Pence as the nominee. So I'm not expecting a bitter primary with a lot of GOP infighting. And we already know a lot about Mike Pence. He's fairly evangelical, and I think he's more reminiscent of a Republican from the 1980s or 90s. That's the type of brand that generally doesn't work well in places like the Rust Belt. And he also does have the experience as vice president as well as governor of Indiana. So in a sense, he does get something slightly similar to a boost for incumbency. Now, Kamala Harris, we're also assuming there was no bitter infighting between her and Joe Biden for the Democratic nomination. At the time, she was U.S. Senator, so she does have that experience. She was also the Attorney General for California. Now, she really did not do anything in that Democratic primary, so we have to take that somewhat into consideration. I think she's going to have some appeal, mostly with the Democratic establishment, probably a little bit more with higher income voters. But the main challenge, both with Harris and Pence, is to try to not consider anything we know that happened after the 2020 election. Since then, Trump did not win again, and most of the base turned against Pence. It's difficult to try to not factor that in, but that's what we've got to do. And the same for Harris. Her low approval ratings driven by what I would think is an inability to authentically connect with voters, that we've also got to try to not factor in. Now, of course, she was who she was prior to the 2020 election. Just like Pence's charisma, personality, and authenticity, I'm trying to factor it in enough, but at the same time, not put too much weight on what we already know happens after the fact. Plus, this is just a head-to-head matchup. If you try to factor in third parties, that would make it that much more of a challenge to try to guess the margins. So there are definitely going to be different takes on this kind of a scenario. You're going to think Pence or Harris is or is not going to excite certain segments of the electorate. It's all up for debate, so let's not spend way too much time dwelling on the details. But one thing that for sure happened in this scenario is the pandemic, so that's yet another layer to try to factor in. Ultimately, I think the map is only going to be about 2 points or so different than the actual 2020 map. So let's go through the states. We'll talk a little bit more about it at the end. Alaska is going to be safe for Pence. Hawaii, safe for Harris. Washington, Oregon, Harris's home state of California, safe for Harris. Nevada is narrowly going to stay blue by a tilt margin. Idaho, Utah, safe for Pence. Arizona, Trump's brand is not effective here. Pence is going to be able to reclaim the state by a small 1 to 2 point lean margin. Montana, Wyoming, safe for Pence. Colorado, still safe for Harris. New Mexico, that's going to go from safe down to likely for Harris. North and South Dakota, safe for Pence. Nebraska, at large, safe for Pence. The 2nd District leans for Harris. Kansas, Oklahoma, safe for Pence. Texas, high single digits, likely for Pence. Minnesota, mid-single digits, but still right over the line and likely for Harris. Iowa, high single digits, likely for Pence. Missouri, Arkansas, Louisiana, safe for Pence. Now, as we get into the Rust Belt, these are the most difficult states. I think Pence's support would drop 1 to 2 points in those deep red counties, but he would gain 1 to 2 points back in the suburbs with independents. So in Wisconsin, I think that's just barely going to be enough to flip the state. It's still going to be extremely close, so it could go either way, but it is going to go to Pence by a tilt. Illinois, safe for Harris. Michigan, if this were 20 years ago, I think Harris would win here by at least 4 or 5 points. But considering everything, especially from Pence being from nearby Indiana, I think Pence would improve on Donald Trump's margin very slightly, but it is still going to go to Harris by a tilt. Pence's home state of Indiana, safe. Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, Alabama, safe for Pence. Down to Florida, I think everything would even out. Pence would still carry the state by a lean margin. Up to Georgia, here's another one that would prefer a more classically conservative Republican. That is going to be Mike Pence. It's debatable whether Harris would increase turnout with black voters, but I think Pence's brand is going to be better here for the Atlanta suburbs. He is going to get it by a 1 to 2 point lean margin. South Carolina, safe for Pence. North Carolina, leans for Pence. Ohio, high single digits, likely for Pence. West Virginia, safe for Pence. Into the northeast corner, Maine at large, likely for Harris. The 1st District, safe for Harris. The 2nd District, this is pretty Trump friendly. I think they would not be as into Pence here. So that is going to bring it down to a leans for Pence. Next door in New Hampshire, Harris is going to get it by a lean margin. Now the blue states, Vermont, New York, Massachusetts, Connecticut, Rhode Island, New Jersey, Delaware, Maryland, Washington, D.C. I think they're too blue. I don't think that's going to change. Harris gets them safe. Next in Pennsylvania, again, I think Pence is going to do a little bit better in the Philadelphia suburbs, but at the same time, Pence is not Trump. He's going to lose a little bit of support with the base, so it's going to stay with Harris by a tilled margin. The last state is Virginia. Even though Northern Virginia would be more open to a candidate like Pence, I think the realignment and polarization has already occurred. The state is still going to go to Harris by a likely margin. So that's it. The final total is a debatable 269-269 tie. It's extremely close either way. And I kind of summed it up, but I think Pence does about 1 to 2 points better in some of the suburbs. He's going to get back some of those Republicans that moved away from the Trump brand, but he does not nearly have the kind of charisma or excitement that Trump offers with the base. Those voters are just not going to be as interested in hearing from an establishment Republican. Plus, in this, Pence is still going to have to answer a lot of questions about Donald Trump, and it's going to be the middle of a pandemic. Harris is going to have an opening there, so she's going to be competitive. Now, Harris has her weaknesses. I think she's inauthentic, similar to Hillary Clinton. There's always going to be voters enthusiastic for her, but based on her performance in the Democratic primary, even in this scenario prior to her actually getting into office, I don't really think she's a strong candidate. So as always, you're going to emphasize different things. You might say Pence is way too religious. He's not going to be able to win over a wide swath of voters. That's totally possible. He benefits the most by having been a governor and being vice president for 4 years. That does count for something. And you also might say Harris is going to completely alienate progressives. She was too tough on crime when she was a prosecutor, and she would lead way too hard on identity politics to be able to connect with voters. That's also completely possible. Again, we've got to try to not think about anything that happened after the 2020 election. It's difficult, but it's supposed to be fun to try to consider an alternate history. I try to look at all the states and consider all the margins and the factors and the issues at the time. These are two very different but ultimately pro-establishment candidates. Who knows what would really happen or how they would run their campaigns or who they would pick as their running mate. Plus, this is just a head-to-head matchup. If you try to factor in third parties, that would make it that much more of a challenge to try to guess the margins. But eventually, you got to come up with something, and this is the map that I settled on. So let me know in the comments, what do you think about this alternate history? I know a lot of people would think they're both unlikable, but even so, do you mostly agree with this map, or would you make just 1 or 2 or maybe 10 or 15 changes somehow? Let me know down below. On your way out, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Join if you'd like to support the channel. Hit the bell for notifications. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.